Welcome back to Books in 10. Today, we're going to be diving into the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Um, this is a book that really kind of shook things up. In the world of political thought, it tackles some big issues, like the clash between classes, a sharp critique of capitalism, and a vision of a future where class divisions just vanish.
It's amazing how this document, which was originally meant for just a small group of German working men, back in 1848, ended up sparking movements all over the globe. I mean, it became the foundation for the Communist League, but went way beyond that.
Yeah, it's really like a tiny seed that grew into a massive tree, branching out across the world.
Yeah.
So let's get to the heart of it.
Yeah.
What were Marx and Engels actually saying in this manifesto?
Well, they're laying out this theory of history that's centered on class struggle. Their argument is that, history, from the Roman Empire to the feudal system, is essentially a story of conflict between those who have power and those who don't.
And in their time. The big showdown was between
the bourgeoisie and the proletariat.
Okay.
The bourgeoisie, the owners of the factories, the land, the capital, were pitted against the proletariat, the working class, the people who rely on selling their labor to survive.
So this conflict isn't just a difference of opinion, it's like baked into the very structure of the economic system.
Exactly. And the manifesto paints this really stark picture of how this power dynamic plays out. Marx and Engels argue that the bourgeoisie's pursuit of profit inevitably leads to the exploitation of the proletariat.
So while that might sound good on paper, the human cost is huge.
Absolutely. Marx and Engels argue that this constant churn leads to crises and hardship for the working class. I mean, think about it. Factories close, jobs are lost, wages stagnate, all while the bourgeoisie keep getting richer. They saw these recurring economic downturns not as glitches in the system, but as
kind of like built-in features of capitalism.
It's like a pressure cooker that keeps building steam but never quite explodes, just keeps simmering and causing pain. So what did they propose as a solution? Do they think people should just accept this exploitative system? Not at all. They believe that the proletariat, united by their shared experiences and growing in number, would eventually reach a tipping point. They would develop what's called class consciousness.
Okay.
An awareness of their position within the system and their collective power to change it.
So it's not just about individual workers feeling frustrated. It's about realizing they're all in the same boat, facing the same challenges, and that together they can create a wave of change.
Precisely. And they didn't shy away from bold solutions. One of the most controversial ideas in the manifesto is the call to abolish private property.
Okay.
Now, it's crucial to understand they weren't talking about, personal belongings, your house or your toothbrush. They were focused on what they called bourgeois property, the means of production that generate wealth.
So things like factories, land and resources, the very things that the bourgeoisie uses to maintain its power over the proletariat.
Exactly. They argued that under capitalism, wage labor doesn't really create property for the worker. Instead, it generates capital for the capitalist. They proposed this radical shift, transferring ownership of the means of production to the proletariat.
Oh, yeah. So in this system, the people who were actually doing the work would have a say in how things are run and would directly benefit from the fruits of their labor.
That was the vision. It's about giving workers control over their destinies and creating a more equitable distribution of wealth and power. But their critique of capitalism goes even deeper.
Okay, tell me more. What other issues did they raise?
Well, they talked about the problem of alienation. They argued that under capitalism, workers are separated from the products they create, the process of production, and even from each other.
It's like they become cogs in a machine rather than human beings.
Expressing their creativity.
And connecting with their work.
Exactly. They lose a sense of ownership and fulfillment in their labor. And it's not just about individual dissatisfaction. They saw this alienation as having broader societal consequences, leading to this feeling of powerlessness and disconnection.
So it's not just about economics. It's about the very fabric of human experience being warped by this system.
You got it. They also criticized capitalism's tendency towards overproduction, which they saw as leading to those recurring economic crises we talked about.
It's like a hamster wheel, right?
Yeah.
Always producing more, consuming more, but never truly satisfying the needs of the people.
Exactly. Marx and Engels saw this as a fundamental flaw in the system, a system that prioritizes profit over human well-being.
So they've painted a pretty bleak picture of capitalism, but did they offer any concrete solutions? Beyond this idea of abolishing private property, did they have a roadmap for how to achieve this radical transformation.
They did. In fact, they laid out 10 measures.
All right, so we've established that Marx and Engels were not fans of capitalism. They saw it as a system, inherently built on exploitation and alienation. But they didn't just complain about it, they offered a way out. They laid out 10 measures that would revolutionize the mode of production and, ultimately, pave the way for a classless society. 10 measures. That sounds pretty ambitious. It's like a 10-step program for a whole new world.
It's definitely a bold plan, and it's sparked countless debates and interpretations over the years. But before we get into the specifics of those 10 measures, let's talk about how Marx and Engels saw this massive societal shift actually happening. Remember how they talked about the proletariat rising up and overthrowing the bourgeoisie? That wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was the core of their revolutionary theory.
So it's not just about writing a manifesto and hoping people will come around to your way of thinking. They believe in a real, boots-on-the-ground revolution.
Exactly. They believed that as capitalism advanced, the contradictions within the system would become more and more glaring. Economic crises would hit harder, the wealth gap would widen, and the proletariat would feel the squeeze more intensely.
It's like stretching a rubber band further and further. Eventually, it's going to snap.
So they saw this revolution as inevitable, almost like a force of nature.
In a way, yes. They believed that these objective conditions would push the proletariat towards developing class consciousness. Workers would start to see through the illusions of the system and recognize their shared interests and their power to change things.
So it's about moving beyond individual grievances and understanding that their struggles are part of a larger systemic problem.
Precisely. And Marx and Engels pointed out how the very conditions of modern industry were actually fostering this sense of solidarity. Factories brought workers together in large numbers, forcing them to confront their shared experiences. Plus, the rise of communication technologies, like the railways, allowed workers to connect and organize across vast distances. It's almost like capitalism was digging its own grave by creating the very conditions that would lead to its demise.
You could say that. They saw the growth of the proletariat and their increasing organization as an unstoppable force that would eventually challenge the dominance of the bourgeoisie.
Okay, so let's say this revolution happens. The proletariat takes control. Yep. What's next? Do they just magically create a communist utopia overnight?
That's where things get a bit more complicated. The manifesto acknowledges that the transition to a fully communist society would be a process, not a sudden event. They envisioned a period of what they called the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Dictatorship. That word tends to send shivers down my spine, to be honest. It doesn't exactly sound like a recipe for freedom and equality.
It's understandable to have that reaction. The term dictatorship has definitely acquired some baggage, especially in light of the 20th century experiences with authoritarian regimes.
To put it mildly.
But it's crucial to understand it. In the context of how Marx and Engels were using it, they weren't talking about a one-party state or a system of repression and terror. For them, the dictatorship of the proletariat was a temporary stage where the working class would hold state power in order to dismantle the capitalist system and prevent a counter-revolution by the bourgeoisie.
So it's less about a dictator with an iron fist and more about a temporary measure to ensure a smooth transition to this new society.
Exactly. Think of it as a safeguard. During a period of radical transformation, this is when those 10 measures we talked about would come into play. Abolishing private property and land, nationalizing key industries, centralizing credit, and so on.
Right, those sweeping economic changes aimed at reshaping the very foundations of society.
The goal was to gradually dismantle the structures of class division and create the conditions for a truly classless society where the state itself would eventually wither away.
Wither away?
Yeah.
Completely disappear. Now, that's a radical concept. We might need a whole other deep dive to unpack that one.
Yeah.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's go back to those 10 measures. We've mentioned them a few times, but I think it's worth diving into some specifics.
Absolutely. They're really at the heart of how Marx and Engels envisioned this transition to a communist society.
Okay, so first on the list, abolishing private property and land. That's a pretty big one, right? It's not just about farmers and fields. It's about challenging a fundamental aspect of how we've structured societies for centuries.
You're absolutely right. Marx and Engels saw land ownership as a major source of inequality and power imbalance. They argued that by making land public property, you could break up those concentrations of power that landowners held over the working class. It's about ensuring that everyone has equal access to this essential resource.
So it's not just about agricultural production. It's about redistributing wealth and power. in a fundamental way.
Yeah.
And this ties into another one of their key measures, a progressive income tax, essentially. The more you earn, the more you contribute.
All right.
Exactly. This was seen as a way to directly address income inequality and redistribute wealth from the top down. They also called for the abolition of inheritance, which they saw as another mechanism for perpetuating privilege across generations. It's about creating a level playing field and ensuring that everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed, regardless of their family background.
So no more inheriting your parents' fortune?
Yeah.
Or their social status. Everyone starts from the same point.
Interesting. What about the other measures? You mentioned centralizing credit and transport. Why were those so important to them?
They saw these sectors as crucial to the functioning of any economy. By placing them under state control, they believed you could prevent them from being used for private profit at the expense of the public good. It's about ensuring that these essential services are run in the interests of everyone, not just a select few.
So it's about taking the reins of the economy and steering it towards a more equitable and just outcome. It sounds like their vision was quite comprehensive, touching on everything, from land ownership to education.
You're right. They also emphasized free education for all children and the abolition of child labor. They saw education as a fundamental right and a crucial tool for social progress. It's about investing in people, not just profits.
Sounds like they really believed in the power of education to empower the working class and create a more enlightened society.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that these 10 measures weren't meant to be a rigid blueprint. They were meant to be adapted to the specific conditions of different countries and historical moments.
So it's more like a set of guiding principles than a strict dogma. Each revolution would need to find its own path, based on its unique circumstances.
Exactly. Marx and Engels recognized that the path to communism would look different in different parts of the world. But they believed that the underlying principles of class struggle, the need to abolish bourgeois property, and the goal of creating a classless society were universal aspirations.
It's fascinating how they managed to weave together economic analysis, political strategy, and even a sense of moral purpose in their vision for a new society.
And that's part of what makes the Communist Manifesto such a powerful and enduring document.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from class struggle to alienation to these radical 10 measures. We've really unpacked the core of Marx and Engels' vision. But how did these ideas actually play out in the real world? How did this manifesto, written over 175 years ago, end up shaping the course of history?
That's a great question, and one that deserves careful consideration. The impact of the Communist Manifesto is vast and complex, touching on everything, from revolutionary movements to social welfare policy.
Well, in our final part, let's explore the legacy of this manifesto and its continued relevance in the 21st century. Welcome back to Books in 10. We've been exploring the revolutionary ideas of the Communist Manifesto, from its sharp critique of capitalism to its vision of a classless society. But how did this document, written back in 1848, actually impact the world? It's not just a dusty old book on a shelf. It sparked movements, revolutions, and debates that continue to this day. That's right. The Communist Manifesto has had this really profound and complex legacy. I mean, it's left its mark on everything, from labor rights to global politics. It's a document that's been both celebrated and demonized, but its influence is undeniable. Yeah. It's almost impossible to imagine the 20th century without those images of red flags, workers' uprisings, and the rise of communist states. It's like the manifesto threw a spark into a powder keg, igniting a global firestorm.
Well, it certainly provided this powerful language and framework for understanding social inequality and mobilizing people for change. You know, it gave voice to the struggles of the working class and offered this blueprint for challenging the existing power structures.
But its impact goes beyond those explicitly communist revolutions.
All right. Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's influenced labor movements, social welfare policies, and even the way we think about class and inequality today.
Yeah, absolutely. The manifesto's critique of capitalism resonated with a broad range of people, even those who didn't embrace communism as like a political ideology. Think about the fight for the 8-hour workday, minimum wage laws, and social safety nets. These were all influenced by the broader socialist movement that the Communist Manifesto helped to inspire.
So even in countries that didn't become communist, the ideas of Marx and Engels still kind of seeped into the fabric of society, shaping the political landscape in really profound ways.
Precisely. It's like those ripples we talked about earlier. The impact spread outward, influencing everything from labor unions to intellectual debates.
Of course, the legacy of the Communist Manifesto isn't all rosy. We can't ignore the authoritarian regimes and human rights abuses that have been carried out in the name of communism.
Right. That's an important point. The 20th century saw both the triumphs and the tragedies of communist experiments. The ideas of Marx and Engels were often interpreted and implemented in ways that deviated from their original vision, sometimes with devastating consequences.
It's a reminder that even the most well-intentioned ideas can be twisted and distorted when they're translated into real-world politics.
Absolutely. And that's why it's crucial to approach the Communist Manifesto with a critical eye, recognizing both its historical significance and its potential for both good and bad interpretations.
It's a document that continues to spark debate and provoke critical thinking. Even in the 21st century, it challenges us to examine the systems we live under, to question assumptions, and to grapple with the persistent problems of inequality and injustice.
Exactly. It forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about power, exploitation, and the distribution of wealth. And it reminds us that the struggle for a more just and equitable world is an ongoing process.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Communist Manifesto, what's the key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the most important thing is to recognize that the Communist Manifesto isn't just a historical relic. It's like a living document whose ideas continue to resonate and shape our world in both positive and negative ways. It's a call to action, a challenge to critically examine the systems we live under, and a reminder that the pursuit of a more just and equitable world is a constant struggle.
Well said. The Communist Manifesto might have been written over 175 years ago, but its ideas continue to spark debate and inspire action. It's a reminder that ideas have power and that the quest for a better world is never truly finished.
And who knows, maybe in another 175 years, people will still be grappling with the ideas that Marx and Engels first laid out in this remarkable document.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the legacy of the Communist Manifesto and its relevance to our world today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Books in 10 for more thought-provoking deep dives into the world of ideas. And remember, we're giving away an iPhone when we hit 10,000 subscribers. So make sure you're subscribed to be in the running. Thanks for joining us.